Hey everyone, this is Ash for iPoker VIP Coaching and welcome to Fast Lane to Omaha, a quick guide on how to think about PLO. Before we get started, let me give you a quick introduction. Fast Lane to Omaha will be a three-part video series starting with the basics of PLO. Here we'll give you some general recommendations on how to get started, and I will show you the right approach to play PLO. Then we switch from presentation mode to a recorded video session of mine. I will be playing PLO 50, and there we will put the learned theory into practice, and I will show you how to apply the concepts properly. And in the third part, I will be talking about the most common mistakes that I see my students making on a regular basis, and hopefully you can recognize some of your own and plug those leaks as soon as possible. Who is the video series for? Well, mainly it's for experienced poker players, mostly no limit hold'em players who want to give Omaha a shot and who want to learn a quick way on how to get started. And it's also useful for recreational PLO players who already locked in some hands and might want to refresh the fundamentals. And why should you play Omaha? Well, there are a lot of reasons. The game is getting more and more popular. People say no limit holding is drying up and you might want to look around and try something new. This game has way more action, so if you're a bit bored by the grind and just want to put in some variety, you should give Omaha a shot. And one of the best reasons is there's still a lot of fish, and fish means money. Not everyone knows what he's doing, and very, very high win rates are possible and sustainable over a long period of time. So that should be some reasons to get you started. For those who are not familiar with PLO at all, I want to start at the very beginning at the rules. The rules are very similar to No Limit Hold'em, just with some few exceptions. You get dealt 4 whole cards. In this case, ace, queen, 10, 10, single suited to the queen. And at the showdown, you have to use 2 of your whole cards plus 3 of the community cards, which means if the board comes down, king of spades, jack of spades, 6 of clubs, another 3 of spades, and a 9 of spades on the river, which hand do we have? Well, since we have to use 2 of our whole cards and 3 of our community cards, we can't have the nut flush because we would just use 1 of our whole cards. So in this case, we take, for example, the queen of hearts and the 10 of hearts to build the king high straight. Another thing that we have to talk about is the betting itself. In Omaha, it's important to know that on any street, the maximum bet that you can make is always just the size of the pot. This means if the pot is $100, then player A in this case can just bet a maximum of $100. So you can't bet 105 or just go all in if you have 200 in your stack. So $100 is the maximum bet in this case. But how much can player B raise? So player B can also just raise the pot. And the pot size raise is calculated like this. It's 3 times the initial bet plus what was already in the pot. So in this case, it's 3 times 100, the initial bet, plus 100, what was already in the pot. So player B can just raise to a total of $400. This is very important, so you should always remember to plan your hands accordingly because we can't just stick our stack in at any given time that we want. Okay, so by now you should be familiar with all the rules, and before you just open up the client and go all crazy and start mashing the pot button, let me give you some quick recommendations on how to get started. And the first point on my list is bankroll management. PLO is just a game of such high variance that 5 to 10 stack swings up and down per session are a normality, and to battle this we want to have enough stacks in our bankroll. So make sure that you're that you have at least 50 stacks. If you're a bit more conservative, then take more, but PLO is a high variance game, so watch out for your bankroll. Another point is get a good rakeback deal. In PLO, we constantly see a flop, we constantly see a turn and play a river, so we contribute a lot to the pot. The rake is anyway a bit higher, and we just want to make sure that we get something of our rake back. So make sure to check out the iPoker VIP page for the best deals. For all you starters out there, I can recommend Stan James at the Microgaming. You have a lot of traffic on the lower limit games, and the regular to fish ratio is just very, very good in my opinion. And they also have a very good VIP program, so make sure to check that out as well. The next point is start with lower limits. PLO just plays way bigger than no limit hold'em. So if your main game is, let's say, no limit 100, you should start out at least at PLO 25 or PLO 50, because due to the swings it plays almost the same money wise, and we just don't want to lose a lot of money in our learning phase. Of course, it's nice if you catch a heater in the beginning, but just want to make sure that you don't lose as much in the beginning. The next point is set a stop loss. Like I already said, it's a very swingy game and we want to keep playing our A games. So I would recommend after 3 to 5 buy-ins that you're lost, that you step a bit away from the tables and just attack when you feel better. It's just a way of protecting ourselves. Last but not least, work on your mindset. When it comes to mindset, PLO is just such a different beast, and you just have to accept the swings, or not accept, just embrace the swings, work on your mindset, don't tilt, keep playing your A game, and you will be crushing PLO very soon. Pot limit Omaha versus no limit hold'em thinking. Well, the main focus of the whole series is learning the correct approach, and I know that most of you guys probably acquired a certain set of skills over the past few years on how to beat no limit hold'em, but unfortunately you won't be able to use most of the concepts for PLO. So the faster you switch your approach to the game, the faster you will be able to beat it. And the first thing that you have to change is your pre-flop game, because post-flop matters way more in pot limit hold'em than in pot limit Omaha than in no limit hold'em. In no limit hold'em, it's very common that you see now a lot of 3, 4, and 5 bet bluffing and shoving, and the game just got insanely aggressive pre-flop. But in PLO, the equities run so close that you will be hardly a 80% favorite. You can already be happy if you're 55% favorite pre-flop, but as you can see, the equities run so close that it's just worth to see a flop and try to flop something or outplay your opponent post-flop. So make sure that you switch your game from pre-flop play to post-flop game. Learn how to play a flop, learn how to play a turn correct, and learn how to play a river, because you will see in these scenarios way more in pot limit Omaha. And another thing is that the relative hand strength matters way more in PLO than in no limit hold'em. Once we flop a hand, we have to ask ourselves, do we have the nuts? Or can we draw to the nuts? And if we don't have the nuts, how far are we from the nuts? Do we have the second nuts, the third nuts, or the fourth nuts? We shouldn't be thinking like, wow, I flopped the flush, let's get it all in. We have to check exactly how high is our flush, because especially in multi-way pots, there's a very high danger that someone will have the better hand or a better flush than you in this case. So always make sure to check your relative hand strength and don't get too much excited if you flop something strong like a bottom set or straight. Always make sure to check the relative hand strength and check if you have the nuts. This leads me also to my next point. Everyone has something. We all know that it's very hard to flop anything or catch any piece of the flop in no limit hold'em. We're already excited if you flop top pair, top kicker, and just try to get it in somehow. But in PLO, especially multi-way pots, people will constantly flop a very strong draw or at least 2 pairs, so you should give them credit. that they have a hand in these cases. And the last point, it's the high variance. I just can't stress on it often enough. PLO is a game of very high variance. 5 to 10 stack swings are very common, and you just have to get used to. You just have to accept the swings, and you have just to get ready for them. Prepare for the big swings, but also get ready for high rewards. And just don't blame everything on downswing or anything, because PLO is just a game of very high variance. So just wanted you to know that you're aware of it. Alright, so we finally made it to the more fun and more interesting part, the theory. And I always split it into the different streets and divided each into a checklist part and a general advice part. So please don't expect something like a strict guideline. I won't tell you exactly how to play a certain hand, for example, but I want to give you a mental list with important criteria that you can go through to make the best possible decision on the table. And the first point on the list, on our preflop checklist, it's of course the position. Just like in No Limit Hold'em, position is key, and it's way more important in Omaha because the nuts constantly change, the board constantly changes, and we just want to make the best possible decision. Always make easy decisions. We want to be able to represent the nuts properly once the board changes, and we want to be able to realize our equity, for example, if necessary. So make sure to put yourself in a favorable position that you play less out of position but more in position. So just like in No Limit Hold'em, position is key in Omaha as well, probably even more important. After we checked our position, I always like to check my hand for nuttiness, flopability, and playability. Nuttiness means we asked ourselves, can my hand make any nuts? For example, if we have a hand which is single suited to the ace, we can obviously flop the nut flush or make the nut flush, which is very good for us. So this hand definitely has nut potential. We want to check it for higher pairs like aces, kings, queens, because they can flop higher sets and make high full houses. Or we want to check it for good rundown type of hands. A rundown or a wrap is a connected hand which can make a lot of straight, like queen, jack, 10, 9, and the higher our wrap cards are, the better. The second thing I like to check is the flopability itself. We want to ask ourselves, okay, how many hands can my current hand flop? Can I just flop a flush, or can I also flop a straight with it, or a combination of all, a pair plus a flush draw? All of this is good. So nuttiness and flopability doesn't necessarily have to exclude itself. It's very good if it's a combination of both. And the last hand, I don't know if this is a real concept, but I always call it playability. I always put there the one type of hands, because in my eyes they just make either the nut flush, which is very valuable for us, or just some sort of high pair, or some straights but not so much, not connected to the nuts, or not flopping so much. They just make one type of hand, and under certain circumstances they are just still playable, and we won't get into trouble with them, because once we don't flop the certain hand we're looking for, we're just out of the pot. And the last thing that I want to decide preflop is, do I have a hand which I want to play heads up, or do I have a hand which I want to play multi-way? There are some hands which we can play both, because they just play good in both scenarios. Like for example, if you have a high rep with some nut flush draws, it's okay for us if other people come in with weaker hands, so we can stack off their dominated draws or dominated made hands on the flop. But they're also good to just isolate with the 3-bet, for example, and to play the pot heads up. Some hands definitely play better heads up. For example, if you have a wrap but you don't have any suit with it, we don't want to entice other people to come into the pot, so I would say this is then a pushing hand and we should 3-bet it, or thinking about keeping the hand heads up or just 3-way so we don't dominate ourselves. So I prepared 3 examples for you. And I want to start with the first hand. The first hand is Ace, King, Queen, Jack, double suited. The spade draw is with the nut flush to the ace and the heart draw to the king, so 2 very high flush draws and a very high rep. We make a lot of nut straights and we make a lot of strong flushes. One is the nut flush and one is very close to nut flush, so this is a real powerhouse hand in PLO. We can play it from every position. It makes a lot of nuts due to the high flush draws, and it flops very strong, and it's just very easy playable. So this hand you can play both heads up or multi-way. You don't have a problem if you see the flop 6-way, because once you hit your spade flush, you just have the nuts and just hope that someone with the dominated 7 high flush draw comes in. The second hand still looks very good, King Jack 10-9 single suited to the 10. But yeah, for you it probably looks better than it is, because we have a gap at the top, which you can see here, which means the queen is the gap. So we have this King Jack 10-9 and just single suited to the 10. So this hand still flops a lot. We can flop a flush, but unfortunately it's just to the 10. We can flop a lot of straights or some higher 2-pair type of hands, but we really want to keep the hand heads up, because we don't want to be dominated by some higher straight draws or some higher flush draws. So better keep this hand heads up. And our last hand, Queen Queen, deuce 3, single suited to the 3. The hand is actually very bad. If you're under the gun, you should just fold it, but it's playable under certain circumstances. If the table plays very loose, a lot of limping is going on, you can consider limping it back in position. Just try to hit your set of queens, or just try to hit the straight, but still be very careful. The flush in this case is probably worthless most of the time, so I just put it in for playability, because that you can see it has some potential, but we still should be careful with these type of hands. Pre-flop 3-betting. I know that I told you that PLO is a post-flop game, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't 3-bet at all. And I just want to give you a quick hint on why we should consider 3-betting sometimes. The first reason is raising for value. You will see a lot of fishes who raise a lot of dominated hands, and you just want to build already a pot pre-flop, because we have to plan our hand. We can't just go all in when we want, and 3-betting just enables us to create a bigger pot that it's worth fighting for, and we might get the fish to stack off more easier to us. Or of course, if you have some strong aces and you know they stack off with kings, that would be a very good scenario to 3-bet. Another thing is, if we have a pushing hand like mentioned before, we might want to isolate, because our hand will be easier to play in a 3-bet pot. And another reason is just to lower the stack to pot ratio, especially if we're out of position. If the stack to pot ratio is lower, it's a bit easier for us to play our hand, because then just the equity matters and we can stack off easier most of the time. Same goes for calling 3-bets. If we get 3-bet, you should know that you get immediate odds of 2-1, and since the equities run so close in Omaha, we can call actually with almost every hand. Most of the people just 3-bet with very strong hands, because like I mentioned before, there is just value 3-betting. There is no bluff 3-betting in Omaha, like in No Limit Hold'em. There you will see a lot of bluff 3-betting suddenly with 4-7 offsuit just because you have position. But in Omaha you will face value 3-bets most of the time. So in this case, since they have a strong range already, we don't want to call with all of our hands, but we still want to call a lot in position and less out of position, because in position since we can give them a strong range, let's say of kings, aces, very good high rundowns, we can attack a lot of flops which are favorable for us, or just outflop our opponent because the equities run kind of close. There are some hands we don't want to call with since we know they have a strong range, so we want to avoid hands that have an ace in them, like any ace, 6, 7, 9, single suited, or that have pairs with it, because it just makes our hand significantly weaker to call a 3-bet. Okay, that's all you need to know, I think, about 3-betting. I didn't prepare an extra chart about 4-betting, but in the beginning you can just stick to 4-betting just with aces basically, and maybe strong kings if someone is very aggressive, or strong double suited high rundowns. But if you just stick to aces, you're very good to go most of the time. And calling 4-bets, again, you don't want to call with pairs because they will have aces most of the time. You don't want to call with an ace because it's harder for you to outflop them. You can call with any 4 other cards which don't have an ace and a pair in them, but if you want to learn it correctly, just stick to pro poker tools and find out the equities of flopping with which hands against aces, and you're good to go. So that was the preflop checklist, and we now move on to preflop advice. And the first advice that I want to give you is suit up. Always make sure to have at least one suit in your hand, better double suited, because having a single suited hand makes your hand just way stronger. You're able to flop a flush or outdraw someone if you flop the same hand. Let's say you played Jack 10, 9, 8 single suited, and your opponent played the same type of hand, Jack 10, 9, 8. You both made the same straight. You're able to free roll him because you have a flush draw to go with. So make sure to have at least one suit in your hand. The next is, don't forget that you have 4 cards, because the next time you see your ace king suited and decide to raise it, make sure to check your other 2 cards, because it's very important in Omaha that your 4 cards connect well to each other, that they play together. Once you get more experienced, you can start playing 3 card hands with a dangler. The dangler is what we call the 4th card, which doesn't add anything to your hand. But in the beginning, make sure to play all 4 of your cards. Big is beautiful. That's the next advice. Yeah, I said it. So make your life easier by playing bigger nut draws, like nut flush draws, or at least king high suits, then bigger pairs, aces, kings, queens, because you can just flop bigger sets and overset someone. Then bigger wraps, like I don't know, queen jack 10, 9 is way better than 3, 4, 5, 6, because you can just over straight people, make higher nut straights in the end. So don't forget, bigger cards are better. In Omaha, it's fine to limp behind or cold call. I know that in No Limit Hold'em you hardly see it. If someone starts to limp, you instantly want to isolate him, or if someone raises, you don't want to cold call the raise because you might get squeezed. But keep in mind that, first of all, if someone re-raises you again pre-flop, you always get 2 to 1. He can't raise an infinite amount that you're not able to call, so we always get good odds. And it's just worth to play a lot of hands, since Omaha is a post-flop game. And if you don't want to bloat the pot pre-flop, then just limp behind or cold call. It's fine. Not a big deal. Next thing is, don't overplay big pairs. Aces, kings, queens, jacks, and these type of hands are very good hands in No Limit Hold'em, especially if the dynamic is so aggressive pre-flop. But if we don't have anything to go with our hands, or we just want to flop a set, then we don't want to 3 and 4 bet and 5 bet get it in somehow. So just try to see a flop. Don't overplay them. Don't re-raise too strong most of the time if it's not necessary, and don't just stack off post flop with one overpair type of hands. And the last point, especially don't overplay aces. I see people making that all of the time. 3-betting aces whenever possible. Aces is not always aces. There's a big difference between single-suited aces, double-suited aces, or just aces like ace, ace, 6, 9, no suit at all. If you want to re-raise aces or 3-bet aces pre-flop, make sure that you can get a significant portion of your stack in, that you can just stack off with a stack to pot ratio of 1 on the flop. So if you can get at least, let's say, 35 to 40% of your stack in pre-flop with the 3 or 4 bet, then you should go for it. If not, then maybe just calling or limping back is better. So we picked a hand and decided to see a flop, and the first thing that I always want to check is the board texture itself. Is it very dry, like king 7 deuce, no possible draws out? Is it wet or connected, like 6, 7, 8, or let's say a spade draw is out? Or is it even paired, like king 4 and a possible full house or quads already out? We have to watch out for this. But once we check the texture, I want to check my hand itself. And we want to make sure, want to check if we have a mate hand or either a drawing hand. If I talk about mate hand, I don't mean something like top pair, top kicker, or bottom 2 pair. I mean something strong according to the flop to continue with. So if the texture is connected, like 6, 7, 8, I won't get too excited with just top 2 pair or even a set. But I want to make sure that I have something like the nuts or very close to the nuts. So in this case, on a connected board, a straight. Let's say we have a set on a connected board, and we should treat it as a drawing hand, because we don't have the nuts right now, but we can draw to something stronger like a full house. The important thing to consider once you figure out that you have a drawing hand is how many outs do I really have to the nuts. Don't just count every out, always count your nut outs, because this is the only thing that matters. So if you flop a flush draw but the board is already paired, then you have no nut outs because we might already be drawing dead. Or if you flop a wrap draw with like 15 outs to the straight but a flush draw is also possible, then you have to discount your outs and just continue with your nut outs. So always make sure that you count your nut outs correctly. Another thing we want to consider is backdoor draws, because they can give your hand a significant boost on the turn. And a lot of weak players forget about the backdoor draws, and once they have a strong mate hand, to just play against the obvious draws which were out on the flop and completely ignore the backdoor draws. And this makes it very powerful for you to consider the backdoor draws. The last point that I always consider is the stack to pot ratio, since we have to plan our hand accordingly to get our hand in on the river, since we can't just push it all in. Always make sure that you keep track of the stack to pot ratio. Okay, so I prepared a little example for you guys. So we already know the ace queen 10-10 single suited to the queen from before, and we decided to play a hand with it. In the flop comes king of spades, jack of spades, and 6 of hearts. So it's semi-connected and semi-wet. A flush draw is out. The only made hands now are maybe top 2 pair like king jack, but I would consider it already kind of weak. And top set of kings, of course, and middle set of jacks. So what do we have in this case? So in this case, we flopped a wrap draw. But since a flush draw is already out, we also have to discount our outs. So in this case, we have 8 outs to the straight, to the nut straight, plus a backdoor draw with our heart. So we have 3 aces left, 2 queens, 1 10, and 3 nines, which makes it 8 outs plus the backdoor draw. If the board would be king of diamonds instead of the king of spades, then we suddenly have 12 outs plus the backdoor draw, which is a 4 out difference, which is almost 20% or 16% in this case, because now we have Still the 3 aces, but now we have 3 queens, 2 tens, and all of the remaining 9s. If the king of diamonds would be a king of hearts, then we have an absolute powerhouse. I know we are not drawing now to the absolute nuts because we don't have the nut flush, but we are drawing very close to the nuts. And if we have such a big combo draw, then we're just happy to get it in most of the time. Of course, there are some exceptions, but this is already a very, very strong hand to go and see a turn. Flop advice. What else should we consider, and how does PLO differ on the flop from No Limit Hold'em? Well, the first advice that I want to give you is bet for protection and bet for information. From No Limit Hold'em, you probably know already as an experienced poker player that you just bet for 2 reasons. First of all, for value and as a bluff. And in the best case scenario, you know why you do one of both. But in PLO, sometimes we just don't know what we're up against, so it's okay to bet, or we should just bet to protect our hand, and it's okay to bet for information. Bet for protection is clearly if we have a strong made hand, there are gazillions of draws possible. We just want to protect our made hand because almost every draw has equity against us. And bet for information means, let's say we have something semi-strong like a bottom set, but we're not really sure, or a combo draw with a lot of outs but not so many outs to the nuts. We want to bet this also very big, and if we get raised we might fold in these circumstances. So in Omaha it's okay to bet for protection and information as well. The next thing is fast play over slow play. Since we don't know what we're up against and almost every draw can be a favorite over our current made hand, it's hardly correct to slow play ever in Omaha, and we just want to, if possible, get it in, because also for our opponent the turn card can be very scary, and we don't really know which turn card will be scary for him. It might be the straight, it might be the flush, or suddenly the board pair, so we also don't want to lose action. So it's almost often better to fast play than to slow play in these cases. Also, if we talk about draws in Omaha, draws usually start at 11 plus, not outs. If we have a draw in No Limit Hold'em, it's actually kind of easy because most of the time if we have a strong draw with 8 outs, it's the open-ended straight draw, or if we have a flush draw, it has 9 outs. So these are the only draws that we have to consider. But as you saw already, when we decided we have once we figure out we have a drawing hand, we just want to continue with our hands which have real strong equity, because we can have hands with up to, I don't know, 20 plus outs and just have more equity than the top set on the current flop, for example. So make sure to just draw to your hand if you have at least 11 plus nut outs as a rule of thumb. Then nut flush draw is the new set. I remember some years ago when I started out in No Limit Hold'em, I just get excited every time I flopped a set because it was just such a powerhouse and you could hardly lose with it. And this is unfortunately not so true anymore. You can't just stack off with every set in Omaha, but with the nut flush draw, it's just unfairly strong because you dominate all other flush draws and you rob all the outs from straight draws at the same time. So if you have a nut flush draw on the flop, you can almost always go with it. I know it's just 9 plus nut outs, but most of the time if you have something to go with it, you're good to stick it in. But yeah, just be careful, of course. Another thing is, it's important to realize your own equity, especially it's a concept if you are in position. Since sometimes, let's say we have a made hand on a board where a straight is already possible, we don't really want to bet our made hand. We have 4 outs to improve to a full house. We don't want to bet and get raised and have to give up. So realize your own equity means if we suddenly have something like, let's say we have less than the 11 nut outs, or something like 8 outs, 4 outs, 5 or 6 outs, whatever, then try to check it back. Don't necessarily bet it, and make yourself fold because you get raised once. So realize your own equity in position. And then stack the pot ratio again. Have a plan for the complete hand. We can't just get it in. Once we bet the flop, we can just bet a certain amount on the turn and a certain amount in the river. So always plan accordingly. Always think about in advance which turn cards will be helpful for your hand that you can bet again and which won't. So you might have to give up your hand. And of course, last but not least, abuse and use the power of position. Position is still key. Realize your own equity if possible. Minimize the equity of your opponents by betting. Just make sure always to make the best possible decision with position. So we decided that our hand is good enough to see a turn, and once we reach a turn in pot limit Omaha, we will be most of the time either heads up or three-way, because most of the people define just their hands on the flop, and 2-3 people will have a good enough hand to proceed to the turn. And the first thing we want to check is, of course, board changing cards. So if we had the nuts on the flop, we want to check if we still have the nuts on the turn. And if we had the draw, we want to check if we might have hit our draw. If we didn't hit our draw, the turn card might still be scary for our opponent, so we might consider bluffing it. Let's say we were drawing to a straight, but a flush draw was also out and the flush hits and our opponent checks to us, we might consider using our position and just bluffing the turn scare card, since he might be scared of the flush draw as well. Of course we check, like I already mentioned in the flop part, if we gained some equity boost with some backdoor draws, you might consider betting them or playing them more aggressively by raising, but make sure to check for your backdoor draws as well. And of course, again, the stack to pot ratio. Always have a plan for the pot. Always keep an eye on the stack sizes so you can make good enough river decisions. So let's continue with our example from before. We still have the ace queen 10-10 single suited to the queen, and on the flop we had our wrap draw with 12 plus outs plus the backdoor draw. And let's say the turn comes a 9 of hearts, which is very good for us because we turn out the nuts. So the one who played king jack or a set of kings, a set of jacks, will get scared now of the turn card because it's a huge part of our range, like open-ended straight draw at least. If someone else decided to see, let's say we're three-way now on the turn and someone else decided to see the same the flop with the turn with the same hand, you also add now a flush draw to your hand, so you have the nuts plus a redraw, so you are ahead now of a set of kings, and you are also ahead of the same hand, the same opponent who has queen 10, because now you free roll to the hearts draw also. Let's say the turn is just a 4 of hearts. We don't have a hand yet, but we can gain so much equity boost that with our backdoor heart draw that we might consider betting it more aggressively. Okay, so what else can we consider to make our life on the turn a bit more easier? The first thing, if we are in position, we want to bet fold marginal made hands. With marginal made hands, I mean something like, if you don't have a made hand yet, but something like a 2 pair on a semi-connected board, no flushes, no straights, no full houses out, but you have some bottom 2 pair, middle 2 pair, top and bottom 2 pair or something like this, or maybe just top pair, you might want to just bet it and fold to a raise, because we don't want to check it behind. There's not this concept of pot controlling just won't help us here. So we just want to bet fold our marginal made hands to have an easier decision on the river. If we have out of position, we want to start donking if we gain some extra equity on the turn, or if we make our hand, let's say we were drawing to the to the flush or not flush, and the flush comes on the turn, we want to lead these hands out because it's anyways obvious which hands we were drawing to, so we can just lead it out. Our opponent probably won't bet again if he doesn't have the flush in this case, so we won't be able to check raise anyways. So just lead it out, and it's also easier to balance, and it's cheaper for the times when you're bluffing. It's way cheaper than just check raising all the time, and it appears strong as well because people just give you credit in PLO. The next thing is, it's very important for all of you who are just starting out, because you will find a lot of fish, especially on the lower limits, who just chase every single draw. They don't care if they draw to the nuts or not. They just care, okay, I have a flush draw, I have a straight draw, and I just want to hit it. And most of the time, although a pot size bet seems already very, very strong in online poker, they still won't move away. So what you might want to consider is to bet a bit less on the turn if you don't have a hand, but you know the range is kind of well. It's a draw, and once the draw busts, you just want to keep a decent river bet size that they can still fold. So this is planning your hand, of course. And prevent villains from realizing equity. Like I mentioned before, people who are drawing to a certain type of hand mostly have a lot of equity, like 20, 30, up to 50% still on the turn, and we just don't want to give them free cards. Do not pot control like in No Limit Hold'em, just bet out so you prevent villains from realizing their own equity. On the other hand, if you have less equity yourself but enough to see a river, we don't want to bet and fold this hand. We want to bet fold marginal hands, but if we are in position and we have a hand with potential, like let's say we picked up extra straight and flush draw, maybe not to the nuts on the turn, we just want to check it behind and see a cheap river and go from there. And of course, again, abuse the power of position, because in Omaha, position is just key. Alright, so we made it to the most evil street in Omaha and also in No Limit Hold'em, the river. And yeah, there are a few points that I want to go through with you. The first is, of course, board changing cards. Again, we have to ask ourselves, do we still have the nuts, or which draws hit now, and especially did any backdoor draws hit? So make sure to check correctly if the board changed somehow. Second thing is relative hand strength. So all draws are out. We have to define our hand now, either have a hand or not. And what really just matters is the relative hand strength. Don't just say, okay, I have a flush. Just check, do I have a nut flush, second nut flush, or do I have a straight on a flush board? All of these is very important. So make sure to check your relative hand strength correctly. Let's check this on our previous example. We still have the ace, queen, 10, 10 single suited. And on the turn, we made the nut straight, and the river comes a blank. It's a 3 of spades, and we still have the nut, so we can basically value bet against everything. So if our opponent was chasing with a set of kings, a set of jacks, we should consider making a small value bet that we can still get value. You probably won't get value here of king jack or king 9 type of hands, like 2 pairs. So keep your value bet on the lower side, like 1/3 of the pot. If another straight would be possible, like let's say the river comes an 8 and 10-7 would build another straight, and I would consider betting stronger to make these hands call. If the river is a 6 of clubs, it gets a bit more tricky. Sure, we still have the nut straight, but I think it's a bit thin to value here, because the only hands that probably continue on the turn are the set of kings and the set of jacks. And if we get donked into, we probably have to fold against most opponents. But if it gets checked to us, we don't really want to go for real thin value. It's hard for him to have trip sixes, but it's very likely that he has a full house once we get called or raised, of course. If the river brings a flush, then of course we want to bet again. We made a backdoor flush, which is very high, to the queen. Sure, the king of hearts flush and the ace of heart flush beats us, but we have to value bet this hand. Once we get raised, we have to rethink the hand and fold to some opponents, but we have to definitely bet it against most combinations on the river. Okay, so you almost made it to part 1 of Fast Lane to Omaha, and what is left is river advice. And most important for low limit players is maximizing value is way more important than balancing. Just keep on betting your strong hands. Don't think about balancing too much yet. There's still a lot of fish out and not so many strong regulars. You don't really have to balance your entire range on the river on lower limits. So keep maximizing your value and just remember bet, bet, bet. Another thing is don't value bet too thin. Value betting thin is good, of course, but you don't have to force it. It's not like you don't have to value bet the 5th straight, or you don't have to you shouldn't value bet most of the time a straight when the flush is out. I know this sounds a bit strange now, but in the beginning it will probably save you a lot of money if you don't value bet too thin like you're used to in Hold'em, because like I mentioned before, the relative hand strength matters kinda much. This leads me to another point. I didn't even know if I should include this, but I think we will dive into this a bit later. Turn made hands into bluffs more. If you just know that your hand is worthless and there's a possibility that your opponent might fold because he either has the same hand or he was drawing to something completely else, it's okay to turn your made hands into bluffs way more, because everyone is just afraid somehow of the nuts, and if they don't have the nuts or can't have the nuts in this case, then they will fold probably and give you the respect. So this is a thing you might consider. On the other hand, we want to hero call less. If on the river suddenly someone just represents one single hand that can beat you, then he most of the time, if it's a reasonable player on the lower limits, he will have it. There are just way more combinations possible in PLO, and I know it's weird if you just come from no limit hold'em and suddenly you get check raised on the river and he just represents really one single combination or draw. Just give them the respect. Don't hero call too much, because you will be just spewing money at the end of the day. Okay, so guess that's it, guys. So part 1 is over. I hope you enjoyed it and could learn something, and I hope you're now heated up to play some PLO and crush the tables. I know it was a bit of an unorthodox presentation and a bit different from the videos that you're used to normally, but I just wanted to give you some new food for thought for your game and just give you the right approach, because I just think that you will learn PLO faster this way. If you have any comments or feedback, just leave me a question in the comment section below, and I will try to answer every question, of course, as soon as possible. This was Fast Lane to Omaha Part 1. Make sure to tune in next time when I will be showing you how to apply the concepts you've learned now properly in a recorded PLO 50 session. And yeah, I just wish you all the best at the PLO tables. This is Ash for iPoker VIP Coaching, and see you next time.